Good afternoon. My name is Scott Kessler, and for my managerial decision-making project, I researched the problem known as the NIRVANA fallacy. I am giving you this presentation from sunny Dallas, Texas today. So here's how we're going to spend the next 5 to 10 minutes. First, I'm going to give you a definition of the NIRVANA fallacy. Then we'll talk through some additional detail on what that really means and some research. I'll give you my proof of concept and walk through that. We'll talk about how it ties to IT decision making. And then I'm going to tie it up with just discussing some of the unique issues as it pertains to the NIRVANA fallacy. So to start, the definition of the NIRVANA fallacy it basically is an attempt to compare a realistic solution, often an imperfect realistic solution, with an idealized one. And when you're comparing the imperfect solution with an idealized solution, we're often dismissing or discounting that realistic solution because we're only comparing it to the perfect world. Or in other words, we're comparing it to an impossible standard. The NIRVANA fallacy is also sometimes referred to as the perfect solution fallacy. And I like the definition on the slide here. I think the key part and takeaway for me is that the rejection happens because some part of the problem that's being solved, if it still would exist after the proposed solution, the NIRVANA fallacy automatically will reject that, even though it might be the best option available, or even though this imperfect solution that only solves part of the problem is still better than taking no action. And that's where the NIRVANA fallacy can be dangerous. So to break it down into pieces, I think it makes us understand it further. If we look at the logic that's followed for the NIRVANA fallacy, is that premise number one would be a realistic solution that's being proposed. Premise number two would be the perfect or ideal solution, even though it may not be achievable. And is what happens with the NIRVANA fallacy is the person that is susceptible to the NIRVANA fallacy is looking at premise number one and seeing that, although there may be some benefit to it, it doesn't solve everything, or it's not perfect as compared to premise number two. And so they reject premise number one. And the problem here is that you're rejecting premise number one because it's not premise number two, and premise number two might not even be possible. So at the end of the day, the problem here is that we're rejecting the best available option because it's not perfect. And I think most people can see where that's problematic. So next I'm going to give you some kind of real life statements that are examples of this, and some of them you probably have heard before. A couple of them I've heard before. So these are some anecdotal examples of the NIRVANA fallacy. So the first one is, what's the point of making drinking illegal under the age of 21? Because kids still manage to get alcohol. So if we break this down based on the previous slides here, the imperfect solution to reducing the amount of drinking under the age of 21 is to have a law that's against it. And this law works to a certain extent, right? There are people under the age of 21 that will not consume alcohol because of the law, or they will consume alcohol less because of the law. The problem is that there still will be kids drinking alcohol. So the person making this statement may have come out of frustration, may have come out of emotion, may just not have been thinking about it. But if you took the drinking law away, there would be many more people under the age of 21 consuming alcohol. So to reject that law because it's not a 100% problem, it's only a 90% problem or an 80% problem solver, doesn't make any sense, right? The next one, kind of piggybacking on the alcohol statement here. These anti-drunk driving ad campaigns are not going to work because people are still going to drink and drive no matter what. And I think the second part of the statement here, that people are still going to drink and drive no matter what, is true, right? Anti-drunk driving ads do not 100% stop drinking and driving from happening. However, if they stopped 5% of drinking and driving, 10%, 20%, 30, 40, 50, that is still better than not having them at all, right? So there's still the benefit of the 10% fix or the 20% fix or the 50% fix, whatever that number may be. And we could talk about a completely different presentation on the effectiveness of anti-drunk driving campaigns. But the idea here is that to reject the ads in general saying they have no value is ridiculous if it's based on the statement that people are still going to drink and drive no matter what. And this last one is one that we probably all have heard somebody say, but what's the point of living? We're all going to die anyway. And this is kind of the ultimate, play on the nirvana fallacy here, right? Is what's the point of life if it's going to end in death no matter what? And so it's the same thing here. If we think about value, right, is that there is value in living, right? Yes, we're all going to die someday, but there's still value to life. And the nirvana fallacy in this example rejects that. It basically says the only point of living is if you could live forever, right? Which we know is not possible. So those are some of the problems with the nirvana fallacy and kind of real life examples. So let's get into proof of concept before we get into business examples. So proof of concept is an interesting thing, and it's a challenge being a remote student because for this project, we even talked about it on the video coming up, and I took notes. But typically these proof of concepts are done through a live demonstration. They're done in class. And so if we kind of apply the nirvana fallacy just to a proof of concept in general, if we look at kind of premise A, is that would be saying, since I'm a distant student, I am unable to participate. Meaning that if a proof of concept is supposed to be live, that's the ideal situation, that I cannot give a live proof of concept because I'm physically not in Starkville, right? So if I just subscribe to the nirvana fallacy, I would simply not include a proof of concept in my presentation. Or potentially, if you said, if I was only willing to give what I considered a perfect presentation, maybe I would abandon the presentation altogether. Which all of those statements I just made probably sound ridiculous to anybody that's viewing this presentation. However, these kind of things happen all the time, and we're going to talk more. So ultimately here, using an example of this project in a slide as my alternative solution is still better than not attempting to give any proof of concept at all. And I think we all can agree on that, right? It's not the perfect demonstration, but it is better than no demonstration. And then I want to kind of dive into proof of concepts in general even more to kind of segue into how the nirvana fallacy can impact managerial decisions. If you think about the definition of a proof of concept, it is the demonstration of an idea, right? It's going to demonstrate the feasibility of an idea, or it's going to demonstrate the idea in principle. And the idea basically is to verify that some concept or theory has the potential of being used. And this last part of the definition that I underlined, I think is key here, is that a proof of concept is usually small and it may or may not be complete. So what would happen if you were giving a proof of concept in a business setting and the person that was judging whether this concept was feasible or not only was going to accept the ideal, perfect demonstration, right? And I think we kind of got into the 80-20 rule in one of our readings a couple weeks ago. And proof of concepts often are just showing maybe that 20% part of the solution that gives the majority of the benefit. And sometimes they're showing even less than that. And so if the person that is viewing it is looking for 100% of the solution, or whatever amount that is, and the proof of concept's not showing all that, they may be prone to reject it because it's not perfect. So, proof of concepts just are at odds, and also from our reading, the 80-20 rule, which is obviously the idea that 20% of the solution may give you 80% of the benefit, is really at odds with the nirvana fallacy. So I thought that was a kind of a cool takeaway from the reading and researching this topic. Here's some examples of how the nirvana fallacy can tie to information systems decision making. And these are two examples that I've actually experienced in my career already. One of them is a lack of action due to an imperfect solution. So in this example, I was working with a channel partner that they knew that they needed to take advantage and better manage their account base and manage their orders. So they were looking at CRM solutions, CRM softwares, and they looked at somewhere between 5 and 10 of them, and none of them were exactly what they had imagined at really the cost that they had imagined it at. So ultimately, they just continued to use the spreadsheets. And I think this is a good example of the nirvana fallacy, because even if they chose the wrong one, so out of the 5 or 10 they looked at, even if they picked the one that was the lowest level of benefit to them, it still would have been an improvement over just using the spreadsheets. But because they couldn't find that perfect solution, they chose not to do anything, at least in the short term. The next one is I've seen the rejection of a proposal due to imperfection. So there was a proposal for automation to provision, I'm just going to refer to it as product A, and this proposal was initially rejected because product B, which is a complementary product, was still going to be a manual process. And it took some time and a lot of additional man hours to go through and represent to show how having just one of the products automated was still more beneficial than not having either one automated. And this example gets a little bit more complex because questions are coming up about product B and what's the impact of having one automated and one going through a manual flow, and how does that affect the operations team. So I don't want to oversimplify, but at the end of the day, that was the reason for rejection, was because both of them could not be automated. They were saying they didn't want any of them. Ultimately, we went forward, but we did have to deal with the nirvana fallacy. So here's some ways to combat it. And the first thing that I want to point out is that striving for perfection is not the same thing as the nirvana fallacy. And I think this is an important distinction because oftentimes in our careers, we may work on teams that we're trying to get better every day, and we're working towards perfection. We can never get there, and there's nothing wrong with working towards perfection and getting a little bit better every day, every week, every month, every year, with having that to be a goal. You'll never reach it, but you can work towards that goal. That's not the same thing. The second thing that I want to talk about is perfection is a human judgment. And I think that this is a really important thing to think about, because perfection, at the end of the day, really only exists in the abstract world. So when we use the nirvana fallacy, we're actually we're rejecting physical world evidence. And I think that I did some research when I was reading about the nirvana fallacy, and it discussed that one way to deal with the fact that the nirvana fallacy and perfection only exists in the abstract world is to show that even the most useful scientific theories are not perfect. But at the same time, it would be irrational to reject them completely, because they are still helpful and they still are the theories we have, even though they have limitations, right? And then the last thing I think is the way to really understand if you are yourself being susceptible to the nirvana fallacy, or who you're presenting to is as well, is really ask yourself the question, what is the better outcome? Don't compare premise 1 to premise 2 if premise 1's the solution you have versus the perfect solution. Consider the solution you have, if it's the best available, to not taking any action at all. And if your solution is still, the benefit outweighs the cost to no action, chances are it might be a good thing to do. Now, there's things like opportunity cost we have to take into impact, that when you have 1 or 2 or 3 different things to judge versus taking no action, obviously you want to take the one that has the lowest opportunity cost. But I think it's good when we get caught up in being disappointed that something's not perfect or it's not solving 100% of the problem, that we compare that solution and look at it as incremental gain or as a partial victory, if it's better than taking no action at all. So I hope this was helpful. This topic was very interesting to me, and once I read about it more and more and more, it was really easy to apply to both my personal and professional careers. So again, my name is Scott Kessler. I appreciate your time today, and take care.